A staple is a term for a card which is good in pretty much any deck, and in Yu-Gi-Oh Duel Links, common rarity cards are some of the easiest cards you can obtain in the game. So in this list, we'll go over 10 of the best common rarity staples you can obtain. And at number 10, we have Lupine. This is a monster card with the effect where, when it's normal summon, you can banish one monster from your hand in order to banish one monster from your deck that has the same type as that monster. Then, if this card is destroyed on the field by a battle or your opponent's card effect, you can target one of your banished monsters and add it to your hand. And each of its effects are a hard once per turn. Now, the intended use of Lupine is to maybe search out a card from your deck by going -1, where you have to lose a card in your hand in order to maybe get back a different card once it's destroyed on the field. However, there are some decks which are able to just straight up take advantage of the banish from the hand and also gain advantage when the card is destroyed on the field, namely Thunder Dragon decks. If Lupine banishes a card like Thunder Dragon Dark, they can also banish Thunder Dragon Roar from the deck, and both of these effects allow you to go +1 if they're banished, as Thunder Dragon Dark allows you to search out a Thunder Dragon monster when it's banished, and Thunder Dragon Roar allows you to special summon a Thunder Dragon monster from your deck when it's banished. So activating Lupine in Thunder Dragon decks is an immediate +1 in card advantage, not even counting the fact that you also get an additional card once Lupine leaves the field. Although it can also be used in other decks as well. You can also use it to banish Giant Rex in order to summon immediately, or in Metaphys decks in order to activate their effects. But its main use is definitely in Thunder Dragon decks, which is why it's kinda low on this list. In order to place spots on this video, I took into account how much actual play these cards receive in the highest ranks of ranked matches, as well as how much of a staple the card actually is, i.e. being usable in pretty much any deck. Lupine is only really good in very specific types of decks, but it's very good in those specific types of decks, to the point where it's even semi-limited on the ban list. And it technically is usable in pretty much any deck. You're just not going to go +2 off of this card in normal decks like you would in Thunder Dragons. And at number 9, we have Paleozoic Marrella. This is a trap card which has the effect where you can send one trap card from your deck to the graveyard. Then it has a graveyard effect that's shared with all Paleozoic trap cards, where if this card is in your graveyard and a trap is activated, you can special summon this card from the graveyard as a normal monster, with 1200 attack and 0 defense, and with the lingering effect where it's unaffected by monster effects, but it's banished when it leaves the field. One of the great things about Paleozoic trap cards is the fact that they'll all pretty much go +1 from the graveyard with their special summons, and have a second life after the initial effect, which might have sent them to the graveyard in the first place. So if they're able to have really good effects on top, that just makes them even better, which is why Paleozoic Canadia still sees play, even though Book of Moon is just strictly better. And the usefulness of sending a trap card from your deck to the graveyard, like Lupine, is only situationally very beneficial. The main benefits of Marrella's mill effect is to send a trap card Survival's End to the graveyard in dinosaur decks, as that card has a graveyard effect in order to destroy a card on the field. Also in UA decks, Paleozoic Marrella is able to send UA Penalty Box to the graveyard, as that card can allow you to search out a UA spell card. And of course, Paleozoic decks, it's used to just send other Paleozoic trap cards to the graveyard in order to allow you to summon them later. And as a generic card, the ability to send a trap from your deck to the graveyard is highly dependent on what other traps you send, but could also just be used to send other copies of itself to the graveyard if you only care about special summoning this card later. So technically it can be used as a staple like Lupine, but it's only actually useful in very specific types of decks. And at number 8, we have Dicephoon. This is a quick play spell card which has the effect where you get to roll a 6-sided die. And if the result is 2 to 4, you get to destroy one spell or trap card on the field. If the result is exactly 5, you get to destroy 2 spell or trap cards on the field. But if the result is 1 or 6, you take 1000 points of damage instead. So you basically have a 2/3 chance in order to destroy 1 spell or trap card on the field, a 1 in 6 chance to destroy 2 spell or trap cards, making it a +1 in card advantage, and a 1/3 chance of the card doing nothing and you taking damage instead. So the chances of you getting a net positive from the card are higher than 50%. And the destruction of this card doesn't target, so your opponent can't really activate cards in response to this card's destruction. And more importantly, you don't actually need targets on the field in order to use the card. And because of its ability to sometimes destroy something, and being usable from your hand pretty much as soon as you get it in your hand, it has seen some competitive play over the years in Duel Links. Mainly in decks that want to take damage to life points in 1000 increments, like decks that use Cyber Dark Style, which allows them to return a card from their hand to their deck in order to add a Cyber Deck monster from their deck to their hand each time the life points decrease by 1,000 points. Destiny Draw, which allows you to add any card from your deck to your hand during your draw phase, just as long as your life points have been decreased by 2,000 during the duel. And Level Duplication, which can only be used if your life points are 3,000 points or lower. It's also sometimes played with Shell of a Ghost, which is an effect that can only be activated if you have no cards in your hand and only Infernity monsters on your side of the field. And since Dicephoon can be used to potentially clear out spell or traps without requiring your opponent to actually have any spell or traps, it's just an excellent card in order to clear out your hand, while maybe having a positive effect if your opponent does have back row. Although as a piece of spell and trap card removal in of itself, it's obviously too luck-based to be reliable from removal like Cosmic Cyclone or Mystical Space Typhoon. But there is a 1 in 6 chance that it's better than both of those cards, since if you roll a 5, it destroys 2 spell or traps, but it does have to destroy 2 cards, which means if your opponent only has 1 card, then it doesn't work. And at number 7, we have Rebound. This is a counter trap card which can only be activated in response to your opponent activating a card which has an effect to return cards from the field to the hand, where you can negate the effect and then choose to send 1 card from your opponent's side of the field to the graveyard, or pick 1 card in their hand to send to the graveyard at random. So if your opponent has an effect which bounces, like the Harpy Boss Monster or Constellar M7, you can negate that effect and then choose to send any card on their side of the field to the graveyard instead of just the monster you negated, or rip a card from their hand if you want instead. And since it doesn't destroy, it bypasses destruction immunity, like from Bloom Diva the Melodious Choir, nor does it target, so it can also be used to send Saber Dancer to the graveyard. And it can also be proc from Lunalight White Rabbit's effect to bounce spell or trap cards, since you can negate any effect which would bounce any cards instead of just monsters. So the effect is really good, but the activation requirement is kind of niche. Not every deck plays cards which can bounce cards, so it's just going to be useless against the vast majority of decks, unless you play nothing but Harpy Ladies or Lunalights, or decks that go into rank 6 monsters, as M7 is very popular. But if you're not going against any of those kinds of decks, then it's almost a dead card, which is the case for a lot of incredibly specific counter cards. But only almost, because it also has another effect, where if this set card is destroyed by your opponent and sent to the graveyard, you get to draw 1 card. So Rebound can also be used in order to bait out your opponent's targeted destruction, because being able to draw a card in destruction means you go +1 in card advantage, most of the time. Because, for example, if your opponent activates MST to destroy your face-down Rebound, you get to draw a card from that exchange while your opponent loses a card in activating that 1 MST. The same can also be said if your opponent targets your Jar of Greed and you just chain the effect to an MST, except Rebound also has a super useful effect if you're able to actually proc its counter effect. So it has an effect which is actually live against a lot of meta decks and acts as excellent bait to targeted destruction on the field, although only if it's destroyed by a card effect and not banished, as one of the most common forms of spell trap card removal is Cosmic Cyclone, and Blue Eyes decks love to banish cards instead of destroying them with Dragon Spirit of White. So it's not foolproof, but it's definitely good enough where it has seen some competitive play. And at number 6, we have Demise of the Land. This is a quick play spell card which has the effect where if your opponent special summons a monster, you get to activate a field spell card directly from your deck. Now, when it comes to cards that search out field spell cards from your deck, there's not a lot of options in Duel Links since they don't have cards like Terraform in our Metaverse, and definitely not set rotation. So if you're playing a deck where you want a field spell card out which benefits you during your opponent's turn, then Demise of the Land is a legitimate way to search the card out, since it's pretty reasonable to assume your opponent will special summon a monster. Which is mainly useful for decks that run Necro Valley as a floodgate, as they don't actually need the card during their turn, or even Golden Castle Stromberg, which is more useful to have during your turn, sure, but it's also useful during your opponent's turn, as it stops your opponent from attacking. Although outside of Necro Valley and Golden Castle Stromberg, it's not the best card for searching out field spell cards that you want to activate immediately. If you need a field spell card out right away to do your stuff, like Toon Kingdom, Fire King Island, Fusion Gate, or Gear Town, you're better off with the other common rarity card called Planet Pathfinder, which is a level 4 monster that simply has the effect where it can tribute itself in order to add a field spell card from your deck to your hand. This one is also limited in how it can search because you basically have to use your normal summon on Planet Pathfinder, which is ridiculously slow for a lot of decks. However, Toons, Yubel, and Gear Town decks don't really need their normal summon, or can at least give it up for a turn rather easily, and will definitely play Planet Pathfinder in order to get out their field spell card ASAP, That way they can start doing their plays. So, the spot on this list is kind of a dual spot, with the 2 cards that search out field spell cards, that both just happen to be common rarity. And searching out field spell cards is incredibly useful. That's why Terraform and Metaverse are limited in the TCG, and why they're very hesitant to release those 2 cards in Duel Links. And at number 5, we have Card of the Soul. This is a spell card which has the effect where you can look at your deck, and then you can add 1 monster from your deck to your hand, which has an attack and defense that add together to equal your current life points. So with the starting life point value being 4,000 at Duel Links, you're able to add a card like Flash Assailant from your deck to your hand, since it has 2,000 attack and defense. And Card of the Soul is one of those few cards that works better in Duel Links than it does in the regular TCG, because card attacks and defense values are much closer to 4,000 than they are the starting life point value of 8,000. So Card of the Soul has just kind of seen play in Duel Links ever since it came out, where it has almost never saw any play in the regular TCG. In the early days of Duel Links, Card of the Soul was used to search out Flash Assailant and Swift Gaia Dimension Gate decks, which were all about getting rid of every card in their hand so they could use cards which greatly benefit from not having cards in your hand. When the Sacred Phoenix Ritual Monsters came out, it was used in order to search out the level 8 boss monster, since it had 3,000 attack and 1,000 defense. And basically, whatever there's a deck that has a main combo piece that has an attack and defense that can be added together to 4,000, chances are Card of the Soul will be played in order to just search it out. Currently, it's used in some Barrel Dragon and Yosenju decks alongside the skill Life Point Boost Alpha. The skill Alpha allows you to start the duel with 1,000 extra life points, and Desperado Barrel Dragon's attack and defense adds up to 5,000, which means Card of the Soul can search it out immediately with that skill. And in Yosenju's, they have a pendulum monster called Ma Yosenjo Hitat, which has an attack and defense that adds up to 5,000, that they also want to have in their hand as soon as possible. So Card of the Soul is just an excellent search tool, and can situationally be used to search out other cards, assuming you get really lucky with your life point value being exactly the attack and defense of a monster you want to search out from your deck. The most reliable way to use it though, is to just consider your starting life point value, and search out monsters whose attack and defense equals 4,000 or 5,000. And at number 4, we have Pulling the Rug. This is another incredibly specific counter trap like Rebound, although the thing Pulling the Rug counters is a lot more widespread than bounce effects, as Pulling the Rug can be activated when an effect monster activates an effect, which is triggered by the normal summon of a monster, which allows you to negate that effect and then destroy that monster. So in the TCG, back in the day, Pulling the Rug was used as a side deck option in order to stop Monarch decks, since pretty much all Monarch cards activate their effects on their normal summon. And while Monarchs are in Duel Links too, so it still has those same exact benefits, Pulling the Rug is just useful against a lot of other meta decks that actually see lots of competitive play. In Harpy decks, it can be used to stop Harpy Perfumer, which allows them to add a spell or trap card from their deck to their hand on their normal or special summon. Against Blue Eyes, it allows you to stop Sage with Eyes of Blue, who searches on his normal summon. Against Gaia decks, it allows you to stop their main combo piece, Gaia the Magical Knight, who starts his combos on its normal summon. Against Magnet Warriors, it allows you to stop pretty much all of their cards, as I think all the main Magnet Warrior monsters have an effect that activates when they're normal summon. And against Yosenjus, it allows you to stop a lot of the level 4 lower ones. Pulling the Rug is useful against almost all the meta decks, and stopping the normal summon monster's effects immediately can sometimes completely kill your opponent's momentum and just stop their turn dead in their tracks. To the point where being able to resolve Pulling the Rug might win you the game in some cases, because the effect you're negating is usually the main combo starter to all their other plays. Now, there is also Swallow Flip, which is basically Pulling the Rug but for special summon effects, but Pulling the Rug is usually better because it's more versatile, and there's a good chance you'll be able to activate it against a vast majority of decks you play against. Pulling the Rug would be even better if it also had a nice floating effect like Rebound, but since its main effect is live more often than Rebound, it's definitely a better staple card. And at number 3, we have Power Frame. This is a battle trap which can only be activated when a face-up monster you control is being attacked by one of your opponent's monsters that has a higher attack, where you can then negate the attack and then equip this card to your monster, where your monster gains a number of attack points equal to the difference between its attack points and your opponent's monster. So basically, it negates one attack and then grants a whole bunch of extra attack to one of your monsters so that you can use it on one of your other turns in order to start beating over your opponent's monsters. Now, when it comes to battle traps, Power Frame is definitely not the best one in the world, and generally battle traps themselves are kind of vulnerable with how much spell and trap card removal there is in the game. But when it comes to pure staples that are just useful in pretty much every deck, Power Frame is probably the only pure staple common card, which has both seen competitive play in the past and is actually useful in every deck, unlike all the other cards I've talked about so far, which are much more specific in their uses. All of the cards I talked about so far are useful, sure, but Power Frame can actually be used in every deck, which is the only reason it's so high in this list. When it comes to pure, generic staples that are common rarity, Power Frame is kind of the only one that is a pure, generic staple that's not terrible. And at number 2, we have Appointer, the Red Lotus. This is a trap card which allows you to pay 2,000 life points in order to look at your opponent's hand, and then banish one card from their hand until their next end phase. In order to use this card, you also need to have at least one card in your hand, since it does reveal your own hand to your opponent as part of the activation of the card. So, the main use of this card is to activate Destiny Draw, which is a skill that requires you to lose 2,000 life points during the duel in order to activate, which allows you to add any card from your deck to your hand during your next draw phase. And Appointer the Red Lotus is a very easy way to lose exactly 2,000 life points, as a lot of people in high-ranking matches are very careful about never attacking unless they have lethal damage. And Appointer the Red Lotus is also just useful for you too, because if you activate this card as soon as your opponent starts their turn, you get to get rid of the best card in their hand in order to maybe stop your opponent from being able to do anything on their turn. And of course, if you get rid of a card you might encounter during your next turn when you're able to win with your Destiny Draw, like maybe getting rid of their one copy of Karma Cut so they can't set it. Your opponent only loses the card for a single turn, as they'll get it back immediately as soon as their turn ends, or it will stay banished longer if you use it during your turn, in which case you want to just look at your opponent's hand for any hand traps in order to get rid of them for a bit, in case you're trying to push for game or something. But definitely, the main use of this card is just to lose 2,000 life points fast. And since you have to wait till your next turn to use Destiny Draw anyway, the fact that it's a trap card isn't really a detriment to the Destiny Draw skill decks, which just makes it an excellent common rarity card that is usable in pretty much any deck that needs to lose a lot of life points really fast, and give you all kinds of information on your opponent's hand that you can play around whatever they might have. And at number 1, we have Power of the Guardians. This is an equipped spell card which can be equipped to any monster, and has the effect that when an attack is declared involving that monster, you get to place one spell counter on this card, where the equipped monster gains 500 attack and defense for each spell counter. And also, if the equipped monster would be destroyed by battle or a card effect, you can remove one of the spell counters instead. So if you equip this card to one of your monsters, it's basically no longer able to be destroyed by battle, since it will just add a spell counter to it as soon as it's attacked, and then you'll be able to remove it immediately in order to prevent its destruction. And it's one of the few ways to actually give battle destruction immunity to a card, as they heavily limit that kind of effect in Duel Links because of how hard it is to get rid of for the average deck. And of course, if you're able to attack a couple of times with Power of the Guardians, you'll just ramp up the attack point value and just be able to attack over anything your opponent controls eventually. And the reason Power of the Guardians is fine to an extent is because it's super easy to stop equipped spell cards by just flipping the monsters it's equipped to face down, or destroying the equipped spell card, with the plethora of spell or trap card removal in the game. And Power of the Guardians is absolutely seen competitive play in Duel Links, mainly in anti-meta Elemental Hero Wildheart decks, or Red Eyes decks in order to be equipped to Red Eyes / Dragon. And it's also kind of the king of Bronze League, as in the lower competitive tiers of Duel Links, most decks just do not have a way to stop Power of the Guardians, so it can kind of win you the game in a lot of low-tiered matches. And if you just dedicate all of your resources to protecting Power of the Guardians, then it can kind of win you the game against most meta decks too, which is the whole point of the anti-meta Wildheart decks, as Elemental Hero Wildheart is immune to trap effects. And Power of the Guardians is good enough to be worth all that extra protection, and is easily one of the best generic staples that is common rarity, because if your opponent does not have an out to this card, then it can kind of win you the game on its own.